It was a quiet evening in Paris until a janitor found a trunk left outside an apartment complex. To most, it looked like forgotten luggage, but inside was the mutilated body of 12-year-old Lola Daviet. Just hours earlier, Lola had been walking home from school, laughing with friends, a normal day, an ordinary route. But somewhere between the building's front door and her parents' apartment, she disappeared. Police later uncovered the truth. Dahbia Benkired, a 24-year-old woman living in the same building, had lured the child upstairs. And what happened next was pure horror: torture, humiliation, and murder. 12-year-old Lola Daviet, a bright, curious schoolgirl with blonde hair and a wide, innocent smile, should have been home hours ago. Her parents, Delphine and Johan, are caretakers of the apartment building where the family lives. Usually, Lola walks home from school, drops her backpack by the door, and chats with her mom before heading upstairs. But today, that moment never comes. Delphine checks the clock again. 5:45 p.m. Still no Lola. She calls her phone. No answer. Maybe she stopped by a friend's house? Maybe she lost track of time? But deep down, a mother's instinct begins to whisper, something's wrong. By 6:30, Delphine is pacing the building's courtyard, scanning every corner, every shadow. Residents start asking questions. Someone remembers seeing Lola at the front door earlier, around 3:15 p.m. A neighbor even recalls a strange sight, an unfamiliar woman talking to her, gently leading her toward the elevator. That woman's name would soon send chills across France: Dahbia Benkired. Inside the building, a surveillance camera records the final moments anyone sees Lola alive. The grainy footage shows the 12-year-old standing near the entrance, adjusting her school bag. Then, Dahbia appears. She's 24, with long dark hair, a calm expression, and a familiarity that doesn't set off alarm bells. After all, she's the sister of one of the tenants. The two exchange a few words. Dahbia smiles. Then, almost casually, she gestures toward the elevator. Lola steps in. The doors slide shut. That footage would later become the centerpiece of a murder trial, one that would horrify even seasoned investigators. By nightfall, the entire neighborhood is searching. Flyers go up within hours. Friends, family, and police scour the streets of Paris. Her parents are desperate, pleading with neighbors, calling every hospital, every police station, every friend. Then, around 11 p.m., something catches the attention of a security guard across the street. A large, dark-colored trunk has been abandoned near a courtyard. It looks out of place, almost carelessly left there. He walks closer. The air is cold. The trunk is locked. And then he sees it, a faint smear of blood near the latch. When police arrive and force it open, the world goes silent. Inside is the body of 12-year-old Lola Daviet, her small frame folded unnaturally, her face pale, lifeless. The number 1 scrawled on one foot and 0 on the other, as if mocking the innocence she once had. Investigators at the scene later describe it as one of the most haunting discoveries in recent French history. Lola's throat has been slit. There are clear signs of torture. And, heartbreakingly, evidence of sexual assault. Within hours, detectives are combing through the building's CCTV footage. And it doesn't take long. There she is, Dahbia Benkired, seen escorting Lola into the elevator. Then later, the same woman leaving the building, dragging a trunk almost too heavy for her to move. A neighbor even holds the door open for her, unaware of what's inside. At that moment, Dahbia smiles and nods in thanks. That trunk, the very same one police would find just hours later. By sunrise, her name and face are everywhere. The police move fast. Witnesses report seeing her nearby, acting strangely, disoriented, rambling about being betrayed. One man tells investigators that she stopped at a cafe carrying that same trunk earlier that day. When he asked what was inside, she allegedly smirked and said, "Kidneys." It sounds too grotesque to be true. But within 24 hours, the man's statement would become one of the most chilling pieces of the case. Born in Algeria, Dahbia had moved to France several years earlier to live with her sister, Friha, who resided in the same building where Lola's parents worked. Those who knew Dahbia described her as unpredictable, sometimes friendly, sometimes volatile, prone to outbursts and strange behavior. She drifted between jobs, and relied heavily on her sister for support. In the days leading up to Lola's death, Dahbia had been sleeping on her sister's couch, refusing to leave after an argument. She felt disrespected, unwanted, consumed by resentment. And on that Friday afternoon, as Lola arrived home from school, Dahbia's anger found a new, innocent target. The next day, police raid Friha's apartment. Inside, they find Dahbia sitting calmly at the table, sipping a drink. There's no sign of panic, no attempt to run. When questioned, she reportedly confesses almost immediately. "Yes," she tells detectives, "I did it." Her voice is flat, her eyes empty. As investigators press her for details, she speaks in riddles, describing bizarre motives, vague revenge fantasies, and cryptic symbols like the 1 and 0 written on Lola's feet. She claims she was guided by something evil, though whether that's delusion or manipulation remains unclear. For the police, one thing is certain. This was no random act. It was a deliberate, prolonged act of cruelty, one that shook even hardened homicide investigators. News spreads fast. Within hours, the story dominates French headlines. A 12-year-old girl, raped, tortured, and killed in her own building. The words, "innocence lost," echo across the nation. Outside Lola's home, hundreds gather. They light candles, lay flowers, leave handwritten notes. Some weep openly, others stand in silence. Across France, parents hold their children a little tighter that night. Lola's classmates, too young to understand such darkness, leave messages like, "We love you, Lola," and "You didn't deserve this." Her brother, Thibault, clings to his parents at the memorial, his face frozen in disbelief. For Delphine and Johann, the pain is unspeakable. They had watched Dahbia come and go from their building, unaware that she would one day destroy their world. As police reconstruct the final hours of Lola's life, a wave of public anger builds. How could this happen? Why was Dahbia, a woman with no job, a history of instability, and an expired residence permit, still living freely in France? The case ignites fierce political debate, as far-right figures exploit the tragedy to push anti-immigration agendas. But through it all, Lola's mother pleads with the public. "Please, do not use my daughter's death for politics. Let her rest in peace." Despite her words, the story becomes unavoidable. A symbol of everything France fears most. Innocence destroyed by senseless evil. In the weeks that follow, Dahbia is transferred to a high-security prison. Psychiatric evaluations label her dangerous, detached, and emotionally unstable. She alternates between remorse and denial, sometimes insisting she didn't mean to hurt the girl, other times claiming she doesn't remember. But the evidence is overwhelming. The footage, the DNA, the confession, and now, 3 years later, the world finally watches as she stands trial. The courtroom is silent as she rises to speak. Her voice trembles slightly. "What I did was horrible," she says. "I would like to ask the whole family for forgiveness. I regret it." But her words, though haunting, cannot undo what happened that October day. For Lola's family, forgiveness is impossible. For France, the memory of that small, dark trunk will never fade. And for the world, this trial is not just about punishment. It's a reminder that evil can hide behind the most ordinary of faces. Before her name became synonymous with evil, Dahbia Benkired was just another face lost in the crowd. To most people, she was invisible, a young woman drifting through the gray corridors of Paris, looking for a place to belong. But inside her, something dark was already brewing. Born in Algeria in 1997, Dahbia's early life was marked by instability. She came from a fractured family, and by her late teens, she was already restless, constantly moving between cities, jobs, and temporary apartments. Friends described her as lonely, unpredictable, and off balance. One former neighbor said she could be warm and friendly one day, then suddenly angry and paranoid the next. When Dahbia arrived in France, she stayed with her older sister, Friha, in a modest apartment building in the 19th arrondissement, the same building where Lola Daviet's parents worked as caretakers. It should have been a fresh start, but instead, it became the stage for something unthinkable. At first, Dahbia's presence was tolerated. She was quiet, distant, often seen wandering the hallways or sitting on the stairs, scrolling through her phone. But over time, her behavior grew erratic. She didn't work. She argued frequently with her sister. Neighbors later told police that they could hear shouting from the apartment at odd hours, the sound of things being thrown, slammed, broken. Her sister begged her to move out, but Dahbia refused. She told people she had nowhere else to go. That sense of rejection, of being unwanted, festered inside her. And according to police psychiatrists, it may have been the spark that ignited the rage leading to Lola's death. In the days before the murder, witnesses noticed Dahbia acting strange. She spent hours pacing the courtyard, mumbling under her breath, glaring at people as they passed. When asked if something was wrong, she reportedly muttered that she was tired of being humiliated. Then came the argument with her sister, the final break. Freya told her to leave the apartment once and for all. Dahbia snapped back, shouting that everyone in the building would regret how they treated her. A few hours later, she met Lola. According to the investigation, Dahbia saw Lola coming home from school. Cheerful, carefree, polite. In her fractured state, the young woman's anger and jealousy collided. She saw a child who had everything she didn't: a loving family, a home, a sense of belonging. And that envy curdled into something monstrous. Prosecutors believe Dahbia lured the 12-year-old into her sister's apartment by pretending she needed help, perhaps asking her to come inside for a quick favor. Lola trusted her. After all, Dahbia wasn't a stranger. She lived in the same building. What happened next can only be pieced together through forensic evidence and fragments of Dahbia's conflicting statements. When police interrogated her for the first time, Dahbia was calm, disturbingly calm. Investigators expected tears or denial, but instead, she spoke in a flat, emotionless tone. "Yes," she said, "I did it." Her words sent a chill through the room. As detectives pressed her for details, her story shifted over and over. At one moment, she said she didn't know why she did it. The next, she claimed she was possessed by something dark, a force that told her to hurt the girl. Then she'd laugh, saying Lola was annoying, that she deserved to be punished. One officer later described the interrogation as a descent into madness. She wasn't crying. She wasn't angry. She was just gone. Like she was watching herself from a distance, the investigator said. Psychological evaluations painted a deeply troubling picture. Dahbia showed signs of delusional thinking, emotional detachment, and narcissistic tendencies. She craved attention but also isolation, a contradiction that made her volatile. In one report, a psychiatrist wrote, "She oscillates between feelings of persecution and grandeur. She sees herself as both victim and avenger." In her own words, Dahbia said she felt betrayed by everyone, her sister, society, even God. She told investigators that hurting Lola was like releasing everything that had built up inside. It wasn't just murder. It was an explosion of every grievance she had ever carried. When investigators asked her about the numbers 1 and 0 written on Lola's feet, Dahbia smiled faintly. "It's symbolic," she said, but she never explained what it meant. Some theorized it represented control, the binary of life and death. Others believed it was a twisted attempt to mark Lola like an object, a possession. Whatever the meaning, it spoke of a mind detached from reality. Meanwhile, her sister Freya was consumed with guilt. She told police that she had begged Dahbia to leave, that she never imagined her sister could be capable of something like this. "If I had known, I would have thrown her out myself," she said through tears. For Lola's family, the knowledge that the killer lived just floors away was unbearable. Delphine and Johan had shared the same hallways, the same building, unaware that danger was hiding in plain sight. As details of the case leaked to the media, France was horrified. Every headline carried Dahbia's face, her cold, emotionless stare. Commentators called her the face of evil. Others wondered if she was mentally ill or simply cruel. But those who saw the evidence firsthand had no doubts. She knew what she was doing, one prosecutor said. Every act was deliberate. From luring Lola upstairs, to binding her, to hiding the body inside that trunk, it all took time, planning, and control. Dahbia may have been unstable, but she was not insane in the legal sense. She understood the difference between right and wrong. She just didn't care. For weeks after her arrest, Dahbia remained silent. Then one morning, she requested to speak to investigators again. When they entered the interrogation room, she sat quietly, hands folded, eyes downcast. "I'm sorry," she said. "What I did was horrible." The words were soft, almost rehearsed. One detective said it sounded like she was reciting a line from memory. Emotionless, empty. When they asked if she meant it, she didn't answer. That moment would later echo in court, when Dahbia faced the Daviet family and repeated those same words. "What I did was horrible. I regret it." But the family refused to look at her. Some wounds are too deep for forgiveness. Experts later described Dahbia's apology as pseudo-remorse, a calculated attempt to appear sympathetic before sentencing. Whether genuine or not, it came too late. By the time her trial began 3 years later, France had already made up its mind. To the public, Dahbia Benkired was not just a murderer, she was a monster. As the trial unfolded, prosecutors laid out a story of premeditation and cruelty. They replayed the CCTV footage frame by frame, showing Dahbia leading Lola into the elevator, then hours later, dragging the trunk through the lobby. Each image cut through the courtroom like a knife. Lola's mother wept. Her brother, Thibault, turned away. Even seasoned journalists left the room as the judge read the medical examiner's report describing the cause of death: mechanical asphyxia due to obstruction of the nose and mouth. In other words, Lola was suffocated. Her throat was cut afterward, her head partially severed. When it was her turn to speak, Dahbia showed no visible emotion. She said she didn't remember much. She claimed she lost control. But when the prosecutor asked her why she wrote on Lola's feet, her response was chilling. "Because I could." The courtroom fell silent. It was a single sentence, but it revealed everything. Psychologists later said that phrase summed up her entire psyche. Control. Power. Domination. Dahbia had spent her life feeling small, overlooked, powerless. And for one horrific afternoon, she became the one in control. And when it was over, she stuffed the evidence of her rage into a trunk and walked away. Calm, cold, empty. The judge described her actions as inhuman. The prosecutor called them the embodiment of pure cruelty. But for the Daviet family, the labels didn't matter. Nothing could bring back their little girl, the child who was kind to everyone, who loved animals, who dreamed of becoming a teacher one day. All they could do was listen, silently, as Dahbia asked for forgiveness one last time. Her words hung in the air, meaningless, as the courtroom doors closed behind her. The courtroom was silent when the verdict was read. The only sound was the soft clicking of cameras and the muffled sobs of a mother who would never again see her daughter's face. After 6 long days of testimony, 6 days of horror, denial, and forced remembrance, the people of France finally heard the words they'd waited 3 years to hear. Guilty. Dahbia Benkired stood motionless as the judge spoke, her expression unreadable. No tears, no visible reaction. Just the same detached stare she'd carried since the day she was arrested. She was sentenced to life in prison, with no possibility of parole for 22 years. It was the maximum penalty allowed under French law. But for many, it still didn't feel like enough. For Lola's family, this wasn't justice. It was survival. Her parents, Delphine and Johann Daviet, had sat through every gruesome detail. They'd seen the photos, heard the experts, and listened to Dahbia's apologies that meant nothing. Delphine had said it best on the second day of trial. There are no words strong enough to describe the emptiness she left behind. In the front row, Thibault, Lola's older brother, clenched his fists as the verdict echoed through the room. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. Later, he would tell a journalist, "It doesn't end here. Nothing ends here." For the people of France, the trial reopened old wounds and raised new fears. How could something so evil happen in broad daylight, inside a home where a child should have been safe? How could someone like Dahbia, unstable, jobless, known to authorities, slip through every crack until a life was lost? These questions fueled a national outrage. Politicians seized on the case. Some far-right voices tried to use Lola's death as a weapon, pointing to Dahbia's Algerian origins, turning the tragedy into political ammunition. But the Daviet family refused to let their daughter's memory be used for hate. In a letter shared by their lawyer, they wrote, "Lola's life must not be used to divide. She deserves peace, not politics." Still, the headlines wouldn't stop. The case became a mirror reflecting the darkest corners of French society: mental health failures, immigration tensions, and the fragility of childhood innocence. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered holding white roses and candles. They whispered her name, Lola, as if saying it could somehow undo the horror. Inside, the judge's final words lingered. This crime was an act of unimaginable cruelty. It was not madness. It was the conscious choice to destroy innocence. In the weeks that followed, journalists dug deeper into Dahbia's life in prison. Guards described her as distant, sometimes unresponsive, often talking to herself. One psychiatrist said she was haunted by silence. Whether that silence was guilt or emptiness, no one knew. But she never appealed her sentence, not once. It was as if she accepted her fate, or perhaps she simply didn't care anymore. For Lola's family, the years since have been an exercise in endurance. They moved away from the apartment building where everything happened. The memories there were too heavy, the hallways too quiet. On anniversaries, they visit her grave, always bringing white lilies, her favorite. Her mother once told a reporter, "Every morning, I still hear her laugh. Every night, I still wait for her to come home from school." In Lola's hometown of Fouqueray, a memorial now stands, a portrait surrounded by candles and children's drawings. Written across one card are the words, "She will always be 12." To this day, no one fully understands what went through Dahbia's mind that October afternoon. Some say it was jealousy. Others believe it was madness, rage, or pure evil. But the truth may never be known. Only one person holds that answer. And she's locked behind bars, forever. What remains is the story of a little girl who trusted the wrong person, a family who lost everything, and a nation forced to confront how darkness can hide in the most ordinary places, even a familiar hallway, even behind a neighbor's smile. Because the real terror of this case isn't just what happened to Lola Daviet, it's how easily it could happen again.